Thank you so much, Dr. Dawn, for giving me the opportunity to visit your class. So very briefly, I will focus on these topics, which is what is gender, what is art, what isn't, what happens when gender and art interact with each other, what is symbolism in art and gender, and what is visual thinking. Some of it may seem a little bit disconnected, but you can always reach out to me later on and we can discuss in detail if you have any questions. Most of us already know the typical definition of what gender is: the state of being male or female. People tend to use these terms as sex and gender interchangeably. We assign a newborn sex as either as male or female based on the genitals. Once a sex is assigned, we presume the child's gender. We put a checkbox against the letters M or F, and nowadays there are places that let you write other. While our gender may begin with the assignment of our sex, it doesn't end there. The person's gender is complex interrelationship between three dimensions. First is body. Our expression of our own body, how society genders bodies, and how others interact with us based on our body. The second one is identity, our deeply held internal sense of self as male, female, a blend of both, or neither, who we internally know ourselves to be. And third, expression, how we present our gender in the world and how society, culture, community, and family perceive, interact with, and try to shape our gender. Gender expression is also related to gender roles and how society uses these roles to try to enforce conformity to gender norms. So each of these dimensions can vary greatly across a range of possibilities. A person's comfort in their gender is related to the degree to which these three dimensions feel in harmony. Gender describes the characteristics that a society or culture delineates a masculine or a feminine. So while your sex as male or female is a biological fact that in the same culture, in any culture which is same, what sex means in the terms of gender role as a man or woman in society can be quite different cross-culturally. These gender roles have an impact on the health of the individual. I'm taking a quote from this article that I read, and Dr. Anne, I can never pronounce her word correctly, Anne Mary Nobilis said in 2004, she's a writer in gender issues and rural practice project in the School of Rural Health, Monash University, Australia. And she says, the gender roles vary from society to society and can be changed. While most people are born either as male or female, they are taught appropriate norms and behaviors, including how they interact with others of the same or opposite sex, with households, communities, and workplaces. Always considering male gender roles as the most important and crucial in the family, female gender roles have always looked down upon. As a Planned Parenthood website says, there are 4 kinds of stereotypical genders. First is personality traits. For example, women are often expected to be accommodating and emotional, while men are usually expected to be self-confident and aggressive. Domestic behaviors. For example, some people expect that women will take care of children, cook, and clean the home, while men take care of finances, work on the car, and do the home repairs. Occupations. Some people are quick to assume that teachers and nurses are women, and that pilots, doctors, and engineers are men. Physical appearance. For example, women are expected to be thin, graceful, while men are expected to be tall and muscular. Men and women are also expected to dress and groom in ways that are stereotypical to their gender. Men wearing pants and short hairstyles, wearing women dresses and makeup. I'm very socially liberal, but I would like to state Caitlyn Jenner as an example of how straight women are being objectified by transsexual people in our society. I'm not against them, but I do question them. Having artificial breasts, long hair, painted long nails, wearing dresses, lipstick, makeup, these materialistic elements unfortunately make them women, or feminine, or at least women-like. They're not only objectifying themselves, they are reinstating the stereotypical image of what a woman should look like or feel like, more women-like. The difference with her is she does not go back to kitchen and cook or clean the house, which is a stereotypical women gender role. My point is, on one hand, a woman is fighting hard to remove the stereotypical impressions through the personality traits, domestic behavior, occupations, and physical appearance. But all these are being reinstated in our society in some way or the other. And we must maintain that clarity and difference in our society. Quoting from the latest report by the Indian government's economic survey in 2017 and 18, mentioned in CNN in January 2018, couples tend to keep trying until a boy is born and has led to the birth of as many as 21 million girls who are notionally unwanted. Some of the ingrained preferences is due to the norms of governing inheritance, the continued practice of paying a dowry of female children to be married, and the traditional of patriarchy. Women joining their husbands' households and rituals which need to be performed by male children. According to the report, 55% of the couples that have a girl will try for another child and will keep trying until a boy is born. And this is where I come in. I'm the third girl child in the family. My father and my mother kept trying for a boy, and every single time they were unsuccessful. Not having a boy became my parents' vulnerability, and it blossomed into 3 independent working women, fitting pretty much in men's gender roles. I was born and raised in India in a very conservative family. I was compelled to study politics, and this statement is one of the reasons why I divorced politics from my career, because I believe that art, freedom, and creativity will change society faster than politics. I'm an artist and a designer. I live and work in New York City since 2007. I have my own design firm and an art gallery, and I collaborate with many artists nationally and internationally and have produced many works of art. The most recent one I'm still working on is called Fat Free Samosa. It's an autobiographical book that describes many important moments in my life that changed me and who I am today. So this brings me to the next discussion of what art and what isn't. And I found this very interesting article, which I will be sharing all my links later on in an email that you can send out, which is another blog post from Annie Wharton, and she quotes about this work. And this is purely rationalizing what art and art is. It has nothing to do with gender at this point. Annie quotes in this article and comes out with very challenging and wonderful answers to what art is and what isn't. I know you are asking me what isn't art, but if the artist calls it art, it is art. In 1917, when Marcel Duchamp put a porcelain urinal in with the signature R. Mutt in a gallery and called it a fountain, the term art was forever redefined. And just because someone doesn't like it, it doesn't mean it isn't art. Especially if you consider historically important artworks that a lot of public backlashes like Warhol's piss paintings from 70s or Karen Finley's 80s shit performances. The planet and era we inhabit right now make it difficult to find anything that isn't art. According to me, she's very right in her statement, but I personally agree only partially. Socrates and Plato have defined art as something that imitates life. So my question to all of you is, do you consider this art? This person was defending herself by saying that this is art. So I want that ability for you guys to think that, do you consider this as art? She might be calling it as art. And if she says, I'm an artist, this is my art, this is art. So, just a question. Any yes or no? No one's judging you. Would you call this art? No? Who wants to answer? Yeah?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay, great. What about this?
I think more arguably that's art.
Yeah?
Yeah. It feels like that one's coming from a place of like, it's trying to say something.
Mm-hmm.
The other one was like, this is trying to like shock people.
Mm-hmm. And what about the mother who's behind the screen, and he's using that piece as part of the work, but at the end of it, what is the objective that he's trying to do?
I think he's trying to say something about police brutality.
Police what?
Police brutality, because I don't know if it's all connected, but like the stuff on the back kind of looks like
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah.
You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. It looks like he's trying to make a statement about something that's a little bit politically charged, but also that affects his life personally.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the shock factor in both this piece and the other piece are a part of art because it says something that might like offend people or that not everybody will want to hear.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That's awesome. And this one. I don't have his name, but the person behind, he's actually a Dutch artist. And he loved his cat. The explanation he gave is that he loved his cat so much that he actually used his body, put on a drone or something, and made it fly. For me, it's a PR gimmick, but for him, this is art. So that's another. And this one, I really wanted to share this one, is where the street dog was tied with a rope in an art gallery and left to die with starvation and thirst, apparently to make some sort of a statement. I could not find any statement of what the artist was trying to achieve, but this dog actually was killed and then left to die. But the artist did it. So question again, I'm not judging, and this is not a point to judge anyone, but if someone's saying, oh, this is my art, and defend themselves, it probably will not work every time for every work. So just something to think about. So yeah, there's always a dark side of everything, and yes, even art. And it is up to us, the individual artist, of how we are interpreting and executing the art, in which form we want to make a statement, and we want to decide and draw a line for ourselves to say that this is where I will stop and not take a life to create an art. Okay. And with this current situation of what is art and what is not, and how this definition and relationship of gender and art keeps evolving, the possibilities are breathtaking, they're endless, and they're very challenging to achieve aesthetically. And I think a lot of people don't, aesthetics like is another world to talk about. Like, this is not aesthetic at all, at any given point of time. So, which is like another lecture to it. So, okay, moving on to, I think this is where I'm going to try to bring the gender and art together. Two full-length figures lit from the side in an otherwise darkened space face us directly. Both are bearded, one positioned slightly in front of the other and have a bare breast exposed and is suckling a child. Ribera, 1591 to 1652, painted this work on commission to the Duke of Alcala, who collected images of bizarre subjects for his own amusement. The female subject, Magdalena Ventura, was in his early 50s at that time and was very well known for her masculine features and long beard. The Latin inscription on the plinth, which obviously is not very visible, but on the right says, a great wonder of nature. Ventura bore 3 sons, although all were grown by the time this painting was made. The baby at the breast is perhaps symbolic of her maternity, and are the bobbin and the shell lying on the top of the plinth. Ribera's description of the cirrus is both grave and sympathetic. The air of solemnity generated by the somber, murky palette is anything but mocking. The direct gaze, serious expressions, and forceful presence of figures lend them to a rare dignity. And this is what I meant about showing the pieces that are being done right now, the art activism, the art gender that's being done right now, and what it was done in the 1500s. There's a huge difference. And there's not much of a difference in the subject, but more of the execution of how things are being executed. And that was the whole point of being aesthetically pleasing, making something that's so bizarre and yet so beautiful to see. So the next example is, from the day we are born, we are assigned a gender, and so defined the delineated society. Male, female, check. Birth certificates force a choice within a gender binary. So do our national passports and pretty much any bureaucratic functions that require us personal information about ourselves. The truth is, nobody exists as an ideal man or woman that advertising promotes, which is challenging all the time. But people are free to define themselves and reject the gender binary. This piece, I'm pretty sure you guys are aware. Frida Kahlo, she made her self-portrait to emphasize fluidity of gender, rejecting rigid masculine and feminine characteristics. This one, Mary famously photographed Marshall Duchamp as Rose Salovey in 1921, a female persona he kept throughout his life. This is one of my favorites. Levine, Canadian photographer, attempts to reveal the superficial nature of gendered appearances. From the Montreal-based artistic photographic series, Alone Time, Levine asked friends to pose as both men and women for each photograph, and it's done the series, therefore showing how malleable and subject to change gender can be. He says, gender is nuanced and can exist in multiple forms within any given person. I'd like to move away from gender binary, and I think my images suggest that could be a reality. In this photograph, the man is holding the popcorn bowl and the woman is holding the remote control of the TV. And to be honest, this actually reminds me of my mom and dad and always the fight of who's going to get the remote control. Art imitating life, and that is what Socrates and Plato's definition of what art is coming to life. But it has stepped beyond imitating life. It is now sort of a force of change and not just imitation. Another example that I want to talk about, it is definitely more activism, I would say, but there's a lot of gender issues that these artists, the background that they come from, and they're bringing that in their work. So I felt like this would be a good example and a good shift to discuss. The artist is Parastu Farrar, that's a wrong pronunciation, but the production of identity and the repression mechanisms by which it redefined comprise the focus of my work. My homeland, Iran, is a constant theme in my artistic practice, but the conception is complex and continuously in flux. Beyond Iran, there is also collective memory of Germany, where I live since 1991. When I arrived there, I was Parastu Farrar. But I have since become Iranian. Every space I inhabit is accompanied by a feeling of displacement. The interaction of contradictory meanings is another central theme of my work. In my series of digital prints and wallpaper entitled Butterfly, the delicate forms of these insects is contrasted with camouflaged scenes of torture. Only when viewers look at these images a second time do they notice that the butterfly wings contain wounded and gouged human figures. This series is intensely personal for me. My mother's name, Parveena, is the Farsi word for a butterfly. It has become the kind of memento for the political assassination of my parents in 1998 in Iran. She has done a lot of series and definitely something to look it up. This is another very activist form, but she is talking about a lot of women issues and the role of women in society. And this work is by Shireen Nishad, another very favorite artist of mine. In 1993 and 97, I produced my first body of work, a series of stark and black and white photographs entitled Women of Allah, conceptual narratives on the subject of female warriors during the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979. On each photograph, I inscribed calligraphic Farsi text on the female body: eyes, face, hands, feet, and chest. The text is poetry by contemporary Iranian women poets who had written on the subject of martyrdom and the role of women in the revolution. As the artist, I took one of the role of performer, posing for photographs. These photographs became iconic portraits of willfully armed Muslim women. Yet every image, every woman's submissive gaze suggests a far more complex and paradoxical reality behind the surface. I can go on and on with millions of examples of how gender role stories are interacting with art and how these forms are coming together into shape, whether it's performance or visual graphic or a concept. I'm hoping that these examples will give you a sense of how they interact with each other. Can anyone tell me if from these examples, all of these examples that I've set forth, what are the two common concepts that come to your mind? The two most important concepts, and the next part of the lectures, is the symbolism and the power of visual thinking. All these pieces are breaking the visual symbolic perception and understanding of gender roles in our society. These images have emerged partly as a cultural reaction to the emergence of well-defined social type, the new woman, bourgeois women who seek financial independence, education, and a professional life, freedom of choice, more control over their own life. To counteract this threat to traditional values, the mainstream definitions of femininity in late 19th century European culture denied women the possibility of genius. And individual women who pursued intellectual or professional activities were described as masculine. Artistic representations of women's proximity to nature counteracted women's demand for intellectual pursuits by reinforcing the boundaries between intellectually endowed virile masculinity and body-found femininity. Patricia Matthews argues that the masculinity of the intuitive artist seer was ultimately protected by the exclusion of women from the category of genius. Like the primitives, women might experience intuition, spirituality, or less of the boundaries of self, but because they lacked genius, they would never be able to transform those experiences into an understanding of higher truths, nor could they communicate those truths through art. Because they challenged normative values and offered alternative cultural forms, symbolism, and aestheticism that often accompanied, it opened new avenues of imagining sexuality. So how are these artists concluding a well-thought visual piece on a performance as an art piece? Okay. So here's another question. Why did Shireen Nishad chose her body of work to be black and white in tone? Or why did Parastu decided her using bold colors of red, and Levine decided to create something so using baby pink, baby blues, and that kind of mood and tone in their work? What do you think what's happening here? Why there are very several similar topics, similar issues revolving around sexuality, women issues, activism, art, all of these being combined together, and they still look so different from each other. Why?
Different women are making them.
Well, that's the literal way of, yeah, it's coming from a different set of mind. But what else? What are other reasons? It's the art of visual thinking. And that's why the thought that's coming from different women, they are thinking differently and how they're thinking differently. So the theory of visual thinking is very important to study that, what shape, or the image that I showed you, this one, why she's in the center of the entire thing, the composition, the lighting, that's where the aesthetic of the project that comes into life, and that's where the visual thinking comes in the picture. So to understand this, I would strongly just suggest reading this book, which is Einheim's Visual Thinking, and these are just some of the things that we can distribute later on. But this book, if anybody wants to glance through it very quickly, go ahead. And I'm going to use some of the quotes from this book, and hopefully it will help you bring as to why things, it's very important to have aesthetics in your work than chopping off someone's head and saying this is my art piece, because that activity is being performed in a different culture, and you're taking that activity out of a context, putting it in a different context. So you have to understand where it's going to work and where it's not going to work. So context and visual thinking both. So this book will help you understand and to be able to make better judgments of how to analyze and help in cognitive thinking of such art pieces that we see every day, to be able to define what art is and what is not, and how to achieve various theories of aesthetics into your creative work, and how to bring interaction of shapes, forms, concepts into your art piece, to tell your story and to bring uniqueness to your work and experience the viewer is experiencing. This book gives you the clue how to understand such art piece in the broader sense of perception that are building and helping you create concepts and execute your ideas. I'm gonna say a couple of quotes from this. The arts are neglected because they're based on perception, and perception is disdained because it is not used to involve thought. In fact, educators and administrators cannot justify giving the arts an important position in the curriculum unless they understand that the arts are the most powerful means of strengthening the perceptual component, without which productive thinking is impossible in any field of endeavor. What is most needed and is not more aesthetics is or nor asterisk manual of art education, but a convincing case made for a visual thinking quite in general. Once we understand in theory, we might try to heal in practice the wholesome split which cripples the training of reasoning power. Another quote from this book where he's talking about concepts take shape. If thinking takes place in the realm of images, many of these images might be highly abstract, since the mind operates often at high levels of abstraction. But to get to these images is not easy. He continues to say that a good deal of imagery may occur below the level of consciousness, and if conscious, such imagery may not be noticed readily by persons unaccustomed to the awkward business of self-observation. Therefore, drawings can be expected to relate to such images or more welcome material. The prototype of the drawings I have in mind are those diagrammatical scribbles drawn on the blackboard by teachers and lecturers in order to describe constellations of one kind or another, physical or social, psychological or purely logical. Such drawings are often non-mimetic, like the ones I just showed you. Do not contain likeness of objects or events. What exactly do they represent? How are they related to the subject matter for which they stand? What are the means of representation at their disposal? What do they aid in thinking? What factors determine how well such a drawing serves its purpose? These are some critical questions an artist, whether they're planning a visual art piece or a performance-based art piece or a sculpture or any other form, these questions have to be answered in their body of work that they produce. And last but not least, another favorite quote of Ironham: "Thinking calls for images, and images contain thought. Therefore, the visual arts are a home ground of visual thinking. To treat art as a form of visual thinking may seem unduly one-sided. Art fulfills other functions, which are often considered primary. It creates beauty, perfection, harmony, and order. It makes things visible that are invisible or inaccessible, or born out of fantasy. It gives vent to pleasure or discontent. In order to fulfill such functions, a great deal of visual thinking must be done." Thank you.